Why is the Pentagon facing, well, a massive house cleaning?
Mhm.
Top generals fired, billions in spending targeted right after a new administration takes office. Welcome to our deep dive into power, politics, and the military. Specifically, we're looking at this huge overhaul happening right now at the Department of Defense, the DoD. We've got sources detailing, really, a radical restructuring under the Trump administration and the new Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth.
Yeah, and the core mission, at least as this administration defines it, it's a really decisive rejection of what they're calling the political softening of the armed forces.
Political softening, okay.
Right. They believe the military's core purpose got, diluted by social and political stuff. So what we're seeing now is this incredibly rapid campaign, high-level firings, executive orders, getting rid of certain social programs, and just a laser focus, really, on warfighting.
This feels like way more than just the usual post-election changes. It sounds like a fundamental cultural and institutional redirection of America's military.
Absolutely.
So we're going to unpack the three big pillars of this conservative reform. First, this push to restore what they call the warrior ethos.
Mm-hmm.
Second, the huge personnel shakeup, which seems designed to make sure civilian leadership is firmly in control.
Yeah, alignment is key there.
And finally, this aggressive mission to cut waste and, importantly, reinvest that money directly into military lethality, actual hardware. So let's get into it. Okay, first up, this cultural shift. The goal seems crystal clear from the directives. Instill a singular focus on warfighting, preparing for war, and preparing to win. So from this administration's conservative viewpoint, what specifically are they getting rid of to, bring back this warrior ethos?
Well, Secretary Hegseth has been completely uncompromising. He stated the political softening has to end because, in his view, it hurts readiness and unit cohesion.
Right.
Our sources quote him directly calling for an end to things like identity months, DEI offices, dudes in dresses, no more climate change worship, no more division, distraction, or gender delusion. The administration is framing all these as basically political distractions taking away from the main mission.
That's definitely some strong language taken right from the secretary's own directives.
Yeah.
And this whole idea of military excellence, it's actually formalized, isn't it, in a specific order?
Exactly. It's formalized in the Prioritizing Military Excellence and Readiness Executive Order. And this order, it mandates sweeping cultural changes. It sets these high standards focused squarely on readiness, lethality, cohesion, honesty, uniformity, and integrity.
Okay.
And the key policy point here is that success in the military, it can't be diluted or, adjusted just to fit what they see as political agendas that aren't related to the mission.
Let's drill down on how that actually impacts personnel standards, because that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Theory meets service requirements. The executive order really zeroes in on medical standards.
It really does. The EO mandates updating a pretty critical medical instruction. It's DODI 6130.03 and within just 60 days.
60 days, wow.
Yeah. And for anyone not familiar with DOD instruction numbers, 6130.03, that governs the medical standards for joining and serving in the military.
Yeah.
So updating this document, that's the mechanism they're using to assert that policies related to certain gender identities are, and this is their language, inconsistent with the medical, surgical, and mental health demands on service members.
So the administration's view is that requiring consistency between assigned sex and presentation is essential for discipline and for what they call a truthful lifestyle.
That's the core argument presented, yes. It links directly to unit discipline and maintaining that specific standard.
What about the practical side? I mean, implementing strict rules about facility use and language across military bases worldwide. What are the immediate challenges there? Logistically?
That is the huge operational question, isn't it? The directives demand a prompt end to what the administration terms invented and identification-based pronoun usage. And beyond that, the policy says service members can't use or share sleeping, changing, or bathing facilities meant for the opposite sex unless there's some kind of extraordinary operational need.
Right.
Just think about enforcing that consistently across thousands of bases, here and overseas, especially where facilities might already be limited or shared. It requires a massive and very quick administrative push.
And this ties into physical fitness too, doesn't it? This whole uncompromising focus on readiness, as Hegseth sees it.
Correctly. It connects straight to the sort of visual representation of readiness. Hegseth was extremely critical of the existing standards. He argued readiness is inherently linked to physical presence, how people look.
He had some pretty blunt quotes on that.
He did. He was quoted saying it was tiring to look out at combat formations and see fat troops, and completely unacceptable to see fat generals and admirals in the halls of the Pentagon.
Wow.
So the public message is pretty blunt.
Yeah.
If the military's focus is purely on physical and mental readiness to fight, then any visible compromises on fitness standards, they're going to be targeted first.
So the cultural message is clear. Tough physical readiness, zero tolerance for anything seen as non-mission. But, a cultural shift needs leaders who are on board.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the personnel turnover. The scale is just staggering. People are calling it a house cleaning of Pentagon leadership. Who exactly got pushed out in this push for political and ideological control?
Well, what's really striking is just the sheer volume of high-level dismissals right away. I mean, immediately after the secretary was appointed, it's a very clear signal they want to eliminate any potential institutional resistance from the absolute top.
And we're seeing that right at the highest levels of the services.
Absolutely. The administration didn't waste any time removing key figures. You had the former chief of naval operations, Admiral Lisa Franchetti, gone. General Charles Q. Brown Jr., who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs, gone.
Right.
Plus, the uniformed leaders of both the Air Force and the Coast Guard were also removed. It really signals that having held a top job in the previous administration offered zero protection if you weren't seen as aligned with the new ideology.
Let's zoom in on the Navy for a second, because the sources describe some real internal friction there, almost like a turf war.
Oh, yeah, this anecdote really paints a picture of that fight for ideological control. The Navy Chief of Staff, John Harrison, who was himself a political appointee from the last cycle he was fired by Hegseth, just days after the new Navy Undersecretary Hum Cao was confirmed.
And Cao is known for being very outspoken, right? Ran on an anti-woke platform.
Exactly. He's a high-profile Navy vet, very much an ideological standard bearer for this new administration. So his confirmation was significant.
And the sources suggest the existing leadership, Harrison and the Navy Secretary John Phelan, they were actively trying to block Cao or limit his influence.
That's the really critical detail, yeah. Reports show Harrison and Phelan actively worked to kind of limit the influence of this new undersecretary position. They even re-signed aides who were meant to help Cao get onboarded. They were apparently planning to personally interview his future assistants, too. So firing Harrison was this massive signal from Hegseth. Zero tolerance for turf wars or any attempts to undermine the new political appointee's direction.
It wasn't just the uniformed brass, though. There were immediate changes hitting the civilian side, too, specifically military lawyers.
Correct. Back in February, Hegseth dismissed the top military lawyers, the general counsels for the Army, Navy, and Air Force. He stated publicly they weren't well-suited to give legal advice for the new vision.
Okay, but then came something even more unusual.
Right. The most maybe intriguing part was the immediate reassignment of 600 military lawyers. They were pulled from their regular duties to serve as temporary immigration judges.
600. That sounds like a huge administrative lift, just practically speaking. What are the operational realities of doing that?
Well, it shows them using personnel management not just for Pentagon alignment, but to tackle other really urgent administration priorities, in this case, border security. But the challenge is immense. These are military legal experts, are not necessarily specialists in immigration law. They have to be trained up immediately and then deployed to help clear this massive backlog of cases. You're essentially redirecting a huge chunk of the defense legal world to deal with a crisis outside the DoD's usual lane.
Okay, moving from people to money. Beyond the culture and personnel changes, there's this strong conservative push for fiscal responsibility, framed as cutting waste. What's the background there? Does the budget review suggest this efficiency drive is needed?
Well, if you connect the dots, the Department of Defense has, sort of famously, failed its last 7 audits, 7 in a row.
Ouch.
Yeah. The administration sees this chronic inefficiency, this lack of accountability, as a major threat to readiness itself. And this is where Secretary Hegseth brought in some outside help through something called the DOGE initiative.
The DOGE initiative. Okay, sounds like another military acronym, but I think this one involves the private sector, Elon Musk. What exactly is DOGE?
That's right. It's not your typical DoD program. DOGE stands for Department Oversight, Guidance, and Efficiency. And what's unique is that it brings in outside private sector experts, including teams associated with Elon Musk, to conduct this really comprehensive DoD-wide budget review.
So applying private sector thinking to military bureaucracy.
That's the goal. Apply those efficiency standards, try to streamline the system, and maybe break free from what they see as outdated, slow government bureaucracy.
But is it working? Are they actually finding identifiable waste with this new system?
They say they are. The DOGE initiative has apparently already flagged significant wasteful spending. They're estimating around $80 million so far.
Okay.
And they specifically went after spending on social policies. They identified and scheduled for elimination $1.9 million in what was tagged DEI transformation and training, and another $3.5 million in defense HR support for DEI. The administration points to these figures as proof that, the Pentagon budget had unnecessary political line items.
So what does this mean for the overall defense budget? Is this just about cutting spending across the board?
No, it's presented as a systematic refocusing. Hegseth announced an 8% OD budget cut, which sounds like a lot. Roughly $50 billion.
Yeah, that's huge.
It is. But the stated goal is crucial here. It's intended to refocus and reinvest existing funds. The idea is to create a more lethal fighting force and sort of reestablish global deterrence.
So the money isn't actually leaving defense, it's being moved around.
Yeah.
Shifted entirely towards hard power capability.
Exactly. That money is slated to be diverted away from the personnel category.
Okay.
Which they plan to reduce by freezing hiring, firing probational employees, cutting the civilian workforce by a pretty ambitious 5% to 8%.
Wow.
And that freed up money, it gets channeled directly into procurement. The big emphasis is on building new ships, new planes, more munitions, especially because the current arsenal is described in these documents as severely depleted and outdated, particularly when you look at potential rivals like China.
But hold on, that raises a big question, doesn't it? If you cut, say, 8% of the civilian workforce, who are the people processing the complex contracts, managing the logistics for all these new ships and planes they want to buy.
That is the critical risk. Absolutely. It's the trade-off.
Does this risk grinding things to a halt in the short term, administrative paralysis?
It could. I mean, civilian staff handle absolutely essential functions. HR, contracting, auditing, planning, maintenance, all that stuff. The analysis we've seen suggests that while the goal is efficiency and lethality, getting rid of thousands of experienced civilian staff that quickly could easily create bureaucratic bottlenecks, maybe even paralysis.
Potentially slowing down the very procurement they're trying to speed up.
Exactly. It's definitely a high-stakes gamble on being able to streamline the bureaucracy that fast without breaking essential functions.
Okay, so these really aggressive changes, the purges, the budget shifts, they're clearly happening because the administration expects resistance.
Yeah.
Or is already reacting to it. Why is it historically so tough to get a president's agenda through the Pentagon, even with a new Secretary of Defense in place?
Well, this gets into that whole thorny issue of civilian control versus the permanent bureaucracy, what some critics call the deep state.
Right.
In the previous administration, especially on foreign policy decisions, like trying to pull troops out of places, the political leadership faced really profound, sometimes active resistance from career military leaders and even some of their own initial political appointees.
Can you give us a specific example? How did that resistance actually play out before?
Oh, absolutely. The push to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan and Syria, for instance, it was consistently subdued, slow-rolled, and detoured. That's the language used in some analyses by career military leaders who just fundamentally disagreed with the president's strategy.
It got pretty tense, didn't it? To the point where top military leaders were reportedly working against the commander-in-chief's policies.
Precisely. You had top brass, including the former Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Mark Milley, described as being appalled. They actively mobilized to prevent a direct presidential order for withdrawal late in the term, arguing it hadn't been properly consulted on.
And they essentially managed to slow it down.
The sources indicate they were successful in slow-rolling the order,
Right.
preventing immediate execution. And that historical context, it's absolutely vital for understanding what's happening now.
So if that's the context guiding these current reforms, it means these really dramatic, rapid purges are basically an attempt to ensure the new leadership is pre-vetted, guaranteed to be committed to the administration's policy vision.
That seems to be the clear rationale.
Specifically focusing on winning, ending endless wars, and preventing the kind of, well, ideological sabotage they felt happened before.
That's the idea. The current administration seems determined to guarantee that its appointees don't undermine policy because they operate with the mindset that, it's their job to save America and the world from their commander-in-chief. A belief critics claim permeated the military establishment previously,
So the rapid purges, the ideological checks,
Yeah.
they're designed to eliminate that bureaucratic pushback right from day one.
That's the goal, yes. Eliminate that inertia and resistance immediately. So we've looked at this really rapid-fire attempt to realign the Department of Defense. It centers on three core principles. This idea of uncompromising warfighting excellence, achieving fiscal efficiency by refocusing the budget, and really enforcing civilian authority through these aggressive personnel changes.
Right.
The political leadership clearly views this sweeping reform as absolutely necessary to protect the nation from global threats like China, while also fighting what they define as a war from within against political distractions and bureaucratic slowdowns.
The scope is it's dramatic. We're talking shifting billions of dollars, dismantling cultural policies that have been built up over years, all to restore what this administration defines as military excellence and that singular focus on winning. So here's a final thought. If a president genuinely believes his own appointees and the permanent bureaucracy are actively working against him, maybe even see it as their duty to override the commander-in-chief, what's the ultimate price you pay for enforcing that kind of rapid political loyalty over potentially decades of institutional experience in military leadership? That's definitely something for you to mull over as this new chapter in defense policy continues to unfold.